Yesterday, after having discussed the four spheres, the lithosphere, hydrosphere, atmosphere and biosphere, we had to stop the discussion midway because of some technical issue, and we were discussing unequal consumption at that point of time. So I'm going to start my session from the same point today. We have seen that in the developed countries of the north, and I have given you the reason why most of the countries, since most of the countries which are developed are located in the northern hemisphere, and that is why we call the developed world, many times we refer to it as the north. So because their diet is meat based, and meat requires a lot of resources to be produced. Because of this, and because of their energy intensive lifestyle, use of power backed equipments, use of ACs, because of all these reasons, they consume a lot of natural resources. On the other hand, India and China also consume, but the reason here is that we have a very large population, and I told you that we have almost 33% of the world population, so naturally we are going to consume more resources. But if you look at the per capita, per individual resource consumption, that is the resource consumption divided by the total population of a particular country, you will find that the developed countries of the north, the developed countries which we call the global north, they consume almost 50 times of the consumption by the global south. And what do we mean by south? Global south. Here we are basically referring to the developing countries and the least developed countries, since most of them are located in the southern hemisphere. So the developing and the least developed countries are referred to as south. So if you look at the resource consumption by the developed countries, is almost up to 50 times. 50x means 50 times of the consumption by the developing and the least developed countries. So you can have a look at the kind of resource consumption which is there. So per capita resource consumption here we are talking about, which means every individual on an average is consuming 50 times the resources which are being consumed here by an individual in the developing countries. So naturally they are consuming more of the natural resources, and this is what we mean by unequal consumption of natural resources. If you talk about the production of global industrial waste, 75% of the industrial waste and the greenhouse gases, it comes from the advanced countries, developed countries. Only the remaining 25% of the greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide, like methane, they are being produced in the developing world or the least developed countries. So this is the kind of unequal resource consumption. So basically they are contributing more to the pollution levels and more to the industrial waste and more to the generation of the greenhouse gases. If you talk about ecological footprint per capita, and this is the 2000 figure that we are taking. Now what do we mean by ecological footprint per capita? See, measure of human demand on Earth's resources. So basically this is a measure of how much demand we are putting on Earth's resources with respect to the capacity of the earth to regenerate those resources. So that is what ecological footprint is. More footprints means you are putting more demand on the earth's resources, and that is not good for the nature, that is not good for the humankind also. So ideally the ecological footprint should be as low as possible. However, a little bit of a small value of ecological footprint is a given because of the evolution in technology, because of the development. However, still the ecological footprints should not be too large. But if you start comparing, you would find in USA the value of ecological footprint per capita is 9 global hectare. In India, and these are the 2006 figures, you would find that is just 0.8 global hectares. GH is the short form for global hectares. Now you can understand that we are consuming far less resources than USA, and even the world average is 2.2 global hectares. So we are even consuming less. Our demand on the nature is much less than even the world average. And if you talk about USA, you would find that they are consuming this much. So naturally you can understand this is the level of unequal consumption, inequitable consumption by different parts and different communities and countries of the natural resources which are otherwise bestowed equally on the whole of the mankind. Again, the irony of the thing is that though the developed parts of the globe, they are putting much more pressure on the natural resources, they are exerting much more pressure, they are demanding much more from the earth's resources, but whenever there is some kind of a resource depletion, who suffers the most? It is the poor section of the society, the poor communities, the poorer countries who suffer the most. Now this picture you can see here, the people fetching water from a long distance. There are so many people who are doing this on a daily basis in the least developed countries and the developing countries in the global south. However, if there's a water scarcity in a richer developed country, what will it do? It will start using submersible engines, it will start using submersible pump sets, it will start drawing water from the underground, it will probably create a piping network to bring water from a far off place. So the rich can afford to survive with resource depletion because they can cope up with that. They have the resources to cope up with resource depletion. On the other hand, that is not possible for the poor sections of the society. If you talk about the GHG, the greenhouse gases, because of which the global warming is taking place, the temperatures are increasing. Who are affected the most? Not the rich, because they always can install ACs, they can always install air cooling arrangements, but this is not possible for the poor. So it is the poor which suffers the most, and this is the irony of the whole situation. Now that we have discussed the unequal consumption as far as natural resources are concerned, now let us have a look at some of the resources that we have. The first one is the forest resource that we have. Now what are the various functions which are performed by forests? Watershed production. So it protects the watershed. What do we mean by the watershed? Watershed basically is the whole area which drains off, from which the drain off is through the same point. So for example, if you talk about the Pithoragarh Valley, this is a watershed because all the water that is received as rainfall or maybe as snowfall or maybe hailstorms, all that water drains through the same common point. So this is what watershed is, right? So as far as the forests are concerned, they protect the watershed. What does this mean? Since forests will comprise of trees and their roots will hold onto the soil, the chances of soil erosion would be much less because of rainfall or because of some other agents of erosion like wind. So there would be less chances of surface runoff of water, and there would be less chances of soil erosion because the roots of the trees would hold on to the soil. Again, since this would happen, there would be less chances of flash floods also. Since the forests are there and the surface runoff is prevented, the water just cannot flow. The water would rather be absorbed by the soil and it would percolate down and it would recharge the ground aquifers where the water is available. The groundwater table would be recharged by this water. So naturally this water would not be able to flow freely and cause any kind of flooding. So there are less chances of flooding if we have got forests. Why? Because since the water cannot flow freely, it would also take more time to flow through a particular forest. Naturally, more time would mean that more of the water would percolate down. It would seep down the topsoil and it would reach the groundwater table, and less amount of water would be available for flow and there would be less chances of floods. Again, because of this, what would happen, since the groundwater table has been recharged, because the water was not allowed to flow freely, it took a lot of time for water to flow, and in that duration quite a significant amount of water percolated down and recharged the water table. There we can also use this water table which has now been recharged by the rainwater during the dry season when there is a drought, and naturally we can also save ourselves from drought if there are forests. Again, what are the functions performed by the forest as far as atmospheric regulation is concerned. Number one, it absorbs solar heat. Why would it absorb solar heat? I hope you remember that we had talked about transpiration. What happens in transpirations? The water available in the trees, in the plants, that gets converted to vapor, and then it rises up in the atmosphere and it forms clouds. Now, to form these clouds and to convert the water into water vapor, naturally you require heat. So where is this heat taken from? The heat would be taken from the solar energy. So naturally the solar heat would be absorbed, and this would be used to convert the water into water vapor. Naturally, if the solar heat is absorbed, naturally the forest would also help in reducing the temperatures in the surrounding areas. That is why if you are living near a forest area and if you come to an urban area, you would find that there is a temperature differential of 3 to 4 degrees centigrade. So in the forest areas or in the vicinity of the forest areas, the temperatures are much lower, because the heat is also being used for evaporation and heat is also being used for transpiration. Again, it acts as a carbon sink also. The forest, you know that the trees and the plants, what basically they do, they consume carbon dioxide and then they produce oxygen and produce carbohydrates. So basically forests act as a carbon sink also. So they help maintain the carbon dioxide levels also. Again, through this particular function of theirs, they are also able to maintain the local climatic conditions. As I said, they are also able to control the soil erosion. Right, this is something that we already discussed, and because of this they are also able to maintain the soil nutrients. Many a times what happens is, when the dry leaves fall down, when the trees shed their leaves annually, somewhere near the autumn, you find that the trees shed their leaves, and these leaves, when they fall on the ground, what happens to them? They decay, and they are basically broken down into simpler elements like nitrogen and carbon, which then further provides nutrition to the soil, and this way the soil remains fertile. So the forest also play a role in maintaining the soil fertility, maintaining the nutrient balance in the soil. Apart from that, the forests play other functions also. They perform other functions also. For example, they provide us food. Now this is something that you can read in detail on your own. They provide fodder, chara for the cattle, provide fuel weight, provide material for construction, provide timber which can be used for construction, furniture, etc. Provide fiber also. For example, we have got the bamboo which is being used to produce so many different items, and then there is the coconut tree which can be used to produce ropes, etc. So they produce and provide us fiber also. They provide us silk also. The silkworm rears on the trees, and then they can also be used for beekeeping and production of honey. Then they also provide us medicinal plants, and these are the consumptive use because they can be consumed directly by the people, but then some of the products which are made available by the forest, they can also be further processed, and that is what we mean by the productive use, right? So for example, minor forests produce fuel wood, fruit, gum, fiber, etc. They are sold in the local markets. Then timber can be used for extracting, timber can be used for furnitures. Timber can also be used for paper pulp, producing paper pulp, which can then be used to manufacture paper. So these are the productive uses. So these are the various functions which are performed by the forests. And now let us have a look at the other concerns related to the forest resources. We are looking at the history, the evolution of forests in India, and you would find, and this is also something that India has in common with other communities. Earlier, the communities which were dependent on the forest, and I'm talking of the older era, the earlier times. At that point of time, the communities which used to be dependent on forest because they were making use of the various items that the forests were producing. For example, they might be using, they probably were using, for example, timber. They probably were using the honey or the medicinal plants that they obtained from the forest. So they were those communities basically which were actually dependent on forest for their livelihood, and they took good care of the forest. However, what happened, please understand, when the Britishers came, a lot of deforestation happened. Deforestation is reduction in forest area. Why? Because the trees are being logged down, they are being cut down. So naturally there would be a reduction in the forest area, in the area of the forest. Now this happened because Britishers required, and I think you would remember that we have discussed in in Indian economy also, they required trees. They actually needed to cut trees so that they can build ships for international transport. At that point of time, the waterways and the ships and the vessels like this were the prominent means of transport. So they had to manufacture ships, they had to produce ships, they had to construct ships, they had to construct railway tracks. We have talked about how they tried to expand the railway network here in India, and they had to manufacture rail tracks, they had to produce railway wagons. For that they required trees. And so what did they do? They came up with a new concept of reserved and protected forests. And as the name suggests, reserved forest meant that they are being reserved, which means the local community would have nothing to do with those forests. The local community was not allowed to harness the resources produced by that particular forest, by the particular reserved forest or the protected forest. What happened actually because of these kind of arrangements? Since now local community had no stake in the forest which was there in their vicinity, because it had been turned into a reserved or a protected forest by the government, they simply started neglecting those forests because they did not have any stake. They simply stopped caring about that particular forest, and this is how they got alienated. The locals got alienated, they stopped caring about the forest in their vicinity, and they start neglecting them. They were hardly concerned with whether the forest is being exploited, whether the trees are being cut down or not, whether somebody is trying to exploit the other forest resources or not, simply because they could not have benefited from the forest anymore, because now that particular forest was converted into a reserved forest for the government or a protected forest for the government. They simply could not have entered that forest and harnessed its resources. So naturally they started being less concerned about the well-being of the forest. Now this was one development that took place during the British colonial rule. Then after the independence also, since we had a lot of population, we had a large population at that point of time. At independent we were around 40 crores, and gradually the population has now increased to almost 130 crores. So we had a number of people to feed, and naturally to feed such a big population, such a large population, you need more and more agriculture production. And for that you will have to cut down the forest, you will have to cut down the trees, you will have to clear the forest so that you can convert that forest land into a cultivable land where you can cultivate more crops. So this was one reason why deforestation continued. And then naturally we also wanted to construct more and more, set up more and more industries, and naturally more and more cities were set up, and cities expanded also, and they slowly started encroaching into the forest area in the vicinity, and the forests were cleared so that the cities could expand. If you go to Delhi, you would find that around 60 to 70 years ago, more than half of the today's Delhi, more than half of that used to be a forest. Now all that forest was basically cleared so that more and more people can be settled there and the city could be expanded. So because of this expansion of cities, increase in urbanization levels, that is what we meant by expansion of cities. So increase in urbanization levels, more and more industries coming up, and requirement of more land to cultivate crops, we had to cut down the forests, we had to clear the forest, and this was again one reason why deforestation continued even after the independence. Then we also saw degradation. Now please understand there is a difference between deforestation and degradation. Degradation is not the reduction in area. there is no cutting down of trees as such, but the quality of the forest drastically declines. There is a decline in the quality of the forest. Now what do we mean by this? The forest area is still the same. No more trees are being cut down. Trees are not being cut down. Cutting down the trees is deforestation. The trees are not being cut down, but the quality of the forest has reduced. Why? Because there are less number of trees now. Because of natural reasons, less species are being supported by the forest. Less species of trees or flora. Flora means the plant life and fauna means the animal life. So less species of trees and plants and animals are now found in that particular forest. So this is the characteristic of degradation. This is how we can say that these are the signals, these are the symptoms of degradation in a particular forest area. So please understand the difference between deforestation and degradation. Deforestation is reduction, cutting down the trees. The opposite is afforestation, wherein you grow more trees, wherein you plant saplings so that they can grow into trees. However, degradation is when the quality of the forest reduces. Why? Because of several reasons. Overgrazing, excessive logging. So overgrazing would do what? Overgrazing would mean that the vegetation would be uprooted by the cattle which is grazing on that particular forest ground. What will happen because of that? Since the vegetation is getting uprooted, the soil would not remain fixed at its position, because the roots of the vegetation which actually held the soil together, now they have been uprooted. And what will happen then if the soil is not firmly fixed in its place? What will happen if there is rainfall, or if there is wind, or there is some other agent of erosion present, water or wind or some other agent of erosion? Then what will happen? The top layer of the soil would be washed away. So if there is a rainfall, top layer would be washed away. If there is wind, again the top layer would start moving. It would not remain at its place, and this basically is known as soil erosion. Naturally, this would ultimately lead to a decrease in the quality of the soil, and the soil would be able to support less number of plants then, and naturally this would lead to fewer number of trees and less species of flora and trees being available in that particular forest. Human induced fires, it can also degrade the quality of the forest, and this is something which is common in Uttarakhand, also in the Uttarakhand hills. Then soil erosion, and I've talked about how soil erosion takes place. Then storms, again storms would not only destroy the trees, would not only damage the tree cover, the tree canopies, but they would also cause soil erosion. And pest attack would infect the trees and the vegetation, and actually the number of trees would decline. We forgot to talk about this excessive logging. Excessive logging is the excessive cutting down of trees. So in a way, deforestation will also contribute to degradation. Naturally, when the trees are being cut down, there are no more tree roots to hold on to the soil will loosen up, and whenever there is some rainfall or some wind blowing, the topsoil would be carried away, which in other terms we know as erosion. So soil erosion would become more prominent and would become more frequent, and the quantity and the volume of the eroded soil would also increase, and this would ultimately impact the quality of the forests. Okay, so basically you can see here that deforestation can also lead to degradation, and degradation can also lead to deforestation. Now this is one more thing. So degradation can also lead to deforestation. So it's not just the one way around. We saw that excessive logging, cutting down of trees, or deforestation will lead to degradation. Degradation may also cause deforestation, because now the forest and the soil in the forest is not rich enough to support the large number of trees. Slowly the number of trees would reduce, and this is what we mean by saying that degradation would lead to deforestation, right? Now if you talk about forest resources here in India, now this is the map of India, and you would find that if you look at the total land area that we have, you find that 77% of that is non-forest, and only 3% of the land area that we have are very dense forest, right? And then the open forests and the moderately dense forests, they have also been shown here, right? So if you look at the overall forest cover in India, you would find that it is just around 21%. So forest cover in India is just around 21%. Ideally, in any country or in any particular community or in any particular place, it is expected that 1/3 of the area should be covered by forest. The forest cover should be 33% of the total land area, but we are falling much short of that ideal scenario. We are having just 20% of our land area covered with forests. And if you want to take a look state-wise, you will find that the dense forests are generally available. The forests are generally to be found in Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand and some parts of the northeast. And if you look at the areas which have been shown here in red, you would find that there the percentage of forest as a total proportion of the land area is way less. If you look at the states like Rajasthan, if you look at Gujarat, you would find that they have a very, very sparse forest cover. Very small proportion of their land is covered by forest, right? So now this is an alarming situation specifically for these parts of the country, and that is why, since Uttarakhand has almost 71% of its area as forests, it is basically considered to be the lungs of the country. Why? Because the forests play an important role in purifying the air. They absorb carbon dioxide, we have discussed this. They act as carbon sink and they produce oxygen. So many times the forests in Uttarakhand, they are considered to be lungs of the country. Okay, to protect forest, now you understand that protecting forest and expanding the forest area is a dire need for the humanity today and dire need for mankind today, and same is the case with India. So we have come up with an innovation, and which is known as joint forest management. Now why do we know it as joint forest management? Earlier the task of forest management was the duty assigned to the forest department, but now this forest management is going to take place jointly under the joint forest management initiative, wherein the local communities would also partner with the forest department in managing the forests, and the local communities would form village forest committee, so that the forests in their vicinity can be taken care of. So for example, the people who are staying in the village, who are the inhabitants of the village near a particular forest, they would be asked to form a village forest committee. So this is what we mean by joint forest management. Both the local communities as well as the forest department would jointly manage the forest, would jointly protect the forest, and would jointly try to expand the forest area. Now JFM is basically identifies the rights and benefits of the local people who are the inhabitants of the villages nearby the forest. So naturally they have got some rights. They should be given the right to use the resources generated by the forest. For example, if in the forest there are some medicinal plants growing, so they should be given the right to harness those resources and to sell those resources in the market. So the joint forest management basically identifies such rights for the local communities, and it also identifies the benefits which should flow from the forest to the local communities, because the local communities are basically taking care of the forests. And since they are taking care of the forest, so a share of income which is generated from the forest by selling the various produce, be it the timber, be it the medicinal plants, be it the honey, or be it the fiber produced from the forest, whenever it is sold in the market, a particular part of that income would be reserved for the locals. In some states it is as high as 100%. So all the income which is generated from forest is reserved for the development of the local community. And why are we doing this now? So that now the local community should have a stake in protecting the forest, because they now understand if the forest is protected, whatever income is generated from the forest, we can utilize it. It would be spent for us, it would be spent on us, it would be spent for our benefit. Naturally they will have a stake in protecting the forest. They will have a stake in ensuring that the trees are not cut down. They will have a stake in expanding the forest area also, and this is what we want. And this is why this particular initiative has been taken. Now what is the job of the forest protection committees? They prevent illegal logging. So they don't allow illegal cutting down of trees. They check over exploitation of the forest resources, because if you are over exploiting the forest resources, you would not be able to continue using it for a long period of time. So you should harness it in a very balanced manner. So if there is an over exploitation of the forest resources, the forest would not be able to regenerate themselves so fast. They would not be able to regenerate so fast, and they would not be able to keep providing you with the resources at the same pace. So you have to reduce your pace of exploitation of forest resources, and this is ensured by the forest management, the joint forest management and the forest protection committees. And they also restore the green cover. So wherever the trees have been cut down, they will also restore the green cover. This is fine. However, all said and done, you may go for afforestation drives, you may plant saplings so that they could grow into forests, and this is how you may convert more of your land into forest land, and you can increase the forest cover. However, please bear in your mind that a forest which has been generated artificially by planting saplings so that they can grow into trees, it would nowhere near, it would be not be able to match in terms of the benefit that it provides, in terms of the ecosystem services that it provides. It would be no way near the forest which are natural, because natural forest will have all kinds of species. You will not find just one single tree there. There would be trees of different kinds, there would be vegetation of different kinds, and it would support animal species and plant species of variety, of a big variety, of a large variety. However, this is not possible with the forests that are actually planted by human beings. So whenever you are going for an afforestation drive and you are planting a sapling, and you are planting a number of saplings in the hope that they grow into forest, that is all fine. You would still not be able to compensate for the natural forest which existed earlier. You simply cannot compensate for that. You would try to reduce the harm by growing more trees and planting the sapling, but it would not be able to compensate fully for the forest cover that you have lost. What I am trying to say in essence is that we have lost a lot of our forest cover. We would never be able to compensate for it fully by planting more trees and going for afforestation drives. However, we can reduce the damage caused by the cutting down of trees in the earlier times. So we can reduce the damage, but we would not be able to compensate. So a better idea than going for afforestation drives would be to ensure that the trees are not cut down in the first place. There are no deforestation activities taking place in the first place. So there are no deforestation activities which are allowed. There is no illegal cutting down of trees which is allowed. These things should be ensured, rather than trying to go for artificial efforts to expand the forest cover by planting more saplings. So this is one thing that you should bear in mind. With this, we are ending this session. Today we have discussed the problem of inequitable distribution of natural resources and inequitable consumption of natural resources, and then we had a discussion on the forest resources that we have and the benefits that the forest resources bring to the mankind. In the next session, we'll be taking up the water and the mineral resources. Thank you very much.